if you're able to give permission. Gil, on to you.
Yeah, Brea, thank you so much for being here. And, we have several people who might join later. Sometimes in various places, internet is slow, as you know, and we always welcome people to join, even if it's not at the top of the hour, so to speak. But we will just go up until, well, another 40, 50 minutes from now. So thank you for your time. I know that you're just recently arrived in Brazil. That's pretty exciting. And I'm grateful that we get to connect and that you've given your time and your expertise to this convening. I just wanted to start off by saying that, you and I are both born and raised in Minnesota. And I still have a deep connection to that state. And I'm not sure what your, emotional connection is to the state, but I still have a deep one. And in the news yesterday was really pretty big around the conviction of, the verdict of Derek Chauvin. And I just can't help but want to just bring that up because of our connection to Minnesota and because of the meaning of that. It's huge. It's huge what has happened in the court system there. And you're connected to government processes, right? And to social activism on a government, kind of connection level and policies. And so I just wanted to invite you to share what some of your responses are to that process and that verdict and what it might mean in general for, grassroots social activism, protest in the streets, all of that. I'd be curious to hear your response to that huge historic moment.
Yeah, I first just want to say thank you, Gail, for inviting me to this. We're excited to be here and to speak with you all, and also to meet you, Abby, because I saw you pitch your Bean Voyage and Summit, so it's exciting to meet you. It's really interesting. Yeah, we just days ago, and I was at the pharmacy last night picking up some things, and they actually were showing the verdict of the trial on the TV in the pharmacy, and it just really dawned on me how much weight the has around the world and how much weight the United States has in setting the standards of what's acceptable and what's not. It just again reiterated to me how powerful the verdict is, because I'm from Minnesota. I've been following closely, and especially being in local government where we've had similar it really sets the precedent for what other cities and states might be doing depending on what happened in Minnesota. I'm just obviously very relieved that was the verdict that the jury came to after hearing testimony from the police chief himself about within all, and had several other police officers testify against Derek Chauvin. So I very relieved, but I also feel like we wouldn't be at this place had we not had the massive protests that we did have. And in the role that I'm currently in, and I work for a city council member, we get asked a lot by people, what would you rather, who want to get involved, and how can people get involved if they can't vote? And I think protesting and sharing in venue is one way that you can actually start to have an impact even without voting. So I don't think that we'd be at this place had not been for the massive amounts of people that were protesting and continue to put pressure on elected and government agencies to pay attention to cases like this. So it was a huge relief. we have to find ourselves in this place to begin with, but definitely very glad that happened. And, you know, several have been in the spotlight right now in Minnesota as well. So, so yeah, it's, you know, I think for me as somebody who is white and hasn't necessarily dealt with these issues myself, but it is not surprising to me that the issues in Minnesota, where people don't necessarily talk about racial injustice in everyday conversations, and actually being polite. Minnesotans love to be polite, so so yeah, it's tragic, but I'm also not extremely surprised that it happened. It's been happening in Minnesota.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. It is time. It's not surprising. There's lots of, you know, joy and relief, you know, that justice has been served. And, you know, you have said that, you know, you're very interested in how idealism, right, and passion for big change, you know, can be handled in creative and also sort of down to earth, pragmatic ways. And so we've seen that protests, right, a big form of idealism in action. Then for those of us that are here that are in another country, and maybe protests are not something that are you know, as easy to do, let's say, on the streets, or the government might be less receptive to that kind of pragmatism. What other sorts of ideas would you share for melding that sense of action, like just do it, just get it done, get on the street, with what maybe is allowed, right, in various communities? How would you comment on that?
Yeah, it's an extremely good point, because, you know, in the US it's very different, where the right to free as much as it possibly can be. And so just the fact that people can go out and protest is, I think, a privilege in and of itself, constitutional rights. But I think it's different in every context. It's hard for me to say what is the best way to you know, have your voice heard and be able to participate in other processes. It just really depends on the context, I think. But it always involves engaging people. You know, it's you have to be able to build works of people who are willing to do something together. So I think whether it's, you know, unionizing, or whether it's you know, putting pressure, a police officer who murdered a citizen, put on trial, it's really all about bringing people to a cause and an issue, and organizing people around that. So it may, you know, take the form of a protest, but it may also, you know, letter writing, or being able to engage people in conversations with decision makers. You know, I don't see myself as someone who's very activisty. Like, I'm pretty, you know, like kind of typically activists, you know, are they show up, they are very, their presence is known. And so I've had to find a way, how do I, with, you know, my personality and just the ways that I do things, how can I actually have an impact? This a couple of years ago, I had my first testimony on a piece of legislation at the city level that would deny a private prison contract that was very notorious for having human rights issues in immigration detention centers. I was very nervous about it. I didn't know what I was, you know, how it was going to be received, if it would have any impact. The meeting on for hours and hours, and I testified at probably midnight or 1 a.m. because that's how many people had signed up to share concern about a private prison company operating a halfway house in Denver. And I really didn't think that that was impact. I thought, oh, they're all, they've all made their decision before this. I'm just one other person that's going to be sharing my concern that they probably already know about. But it was a historic vote, and I had never once thought that they were going to decide to deny this contract that they had been reapproving year after year. And because the community, there was so many people that testified against it and really shared their emotion and their concern for our city to set a precedent of what's okay and what's not okay. They ended up voting to deny that contract, 8-5. And I would have never imagined that would happen. So that's just one example, at least from my experience, that I can share. It really made a difference, and it felt like it made a difference to show up and to continue to be engaged even when the wrong time. You're unsure if it will even matter to the people that you're talking to, and I only shared for 2 minutes. Public comment is just 2 minutes long. So that's just one small example how I think if we have large amounts of people coming together around a common cause, like it's possible to make change that way in whatever way feels you as a leader.
Thank you. Thank you. That is a good example. And I wanted to just ask if, mostly we get what you're saying, but there are interruptions. Would you be comfortable maybe going to audio only and seeing if that makes your delivery more consistent and less interrupted?
Sure. Yeah. Sorry about that. Hopefully this helps.
Okay. That's okay. Maybe this helps a little bit because you're saying some really great things, and mostly I'm following, but let's see if this makes it more fluid. And I wanted to ask you about policy change and work in the government. What are some lessons that you've learned around the sort of slog of government policy change, right? Like how have you personally had to sort of integrate that passion for making change with the heaviness of bureaucracy?
Yeah, it's a good question. And especially being somebody who's, I consider myself a millennial. We get very impatient with these processes. We think, we want things to change right away. And if they don't, we get a little discouraged or, we want to make sure that it happens soon, or otherwise we get disengaged. But it was definitely a learning experience. I've been in local government now for a little over a year, and it took me several months, and it's still ongoing, to really understand how our different agencies interact with one another, and the differences between like how the system works versus individual people within that government system, and how those are two different ways to approach solving a problem that's occurring within government. And so I really just read some of our government documents, which I don't have a legal background, and a lot of the language is really inaccessible to regular people. And so I just kind of dug in and started to research, what does this mean? What does this actually mean in, layman terms? Because I don't know. And I think that is part of our role in being in office, is to make sure that this language is accessible to the people in which it governs, in which it lays out the rules for how the city operates. So I really found myself in a similar place as our constituents of trying to understand these kind of difficult documents. Out maybe where there's like power imbalances. And so in particular in Denver, it's a strong mayor system. I didn't know what that meant before this role. And I think a lot of people don't know how local government functions because it's not really part of our school curriculum. And so what that means is that, we have the executive branch, we have the legislative branch, and then we have the judicial branch. And the executive branch, at least in Denver, is extremely strong in that all of the agencies are under the executive branch. The legislative branch, which is city council, really only has the power to approve contracts, approve the city budget, and to make certain policy changes like rezonings of land. And so what happens in Denver is that maybe the actions are really swift because all of the agencies are concentrated under one branch of government. But what that means is that there's not checks and balances as much as you think there would be in the government. And so that was kind of one of my understandings was, okay, sometimes bureaucracy in the process can actually give people more of an opportunity to give input, which could be a positive outcome. But then of course, when there's problems that we need to solve swiftly, we actually don't have the ability to do so because our system is so bureaucratic in some sense. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I've had a more nuanced understanding of how slow government can be depending on what kind of what kind of tasks are delegated to which agencies and where those decisions are made and who's involved.
Yeah, that does answer the question. And it reminds me of a related question is that, if I were, wanting to get connected to somebody in my local government and try to get some policy change or some conversation going, and I have a grassroots nonprofit that I'm building, should I get to know like the lower people on the rung first, right? Should I like go and get to know them first, or should I just go right to the top? Or yeah, I mean, what would be your suggestion there in terms of cultivating, authentic relationships, right? Sometimes it's the people who have less of a title who really know the most, right?
Yeah, I definitely think that could be the case sometimes. It's a really good question. I think government's so big that it's really hard to where to start to engage and who to engage with. Yeah, one of my mentors who to do policy work in the education system in DC always told me that you need to be just as nice to the aides as you do to the elected official. And I think that's pretty common throughout all industries, is that you should be just as connected with the secretary as you are to the the CEO, right? Because the secretaries do know a lot about what's going on, and oftentimes are overlooked because of their title. But yeah, I think starting with people who are really connected and invested in whatever issue your organization's trying to address will then become your advocates and kind of elevate you to the people that you need to get connected with. Like the nice thing about local government is that pretty much everybody's accessible. At least from what I've seen, federal government and state government, it's really hard to actually be able to meet your elected person, but local government, you may actually be neighbors, right, with your elected official. You may be neighbors with their staff. So it's just much closer and more accessible than maybe some other levels of government too.
That's helpful. I think it is surprising how just going to a local coffee shop and hanging out, you can meet somebody that you had no idea was connected to your cause or to your government. And it's hard to do during COVID. I get it, but that community could be right there, right outside your door, that person that you want to, connect with. And the next question that I have, and I know we'll open it up so that our amazing group can ask you a question, but I just wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about your experience with Project Voice. And that was a few years ago, I think, in which you were the co-executive director, and in that worked with youth to get them engaged, right? It was sort of a youth activism training organization. Can you just say a little bit more about that experience and what it was like for you to work with youth, and what how you accessed the youth and what you did with them?
Yeah. So Project Voice started in the mid 2000s and had been around for 10 years when I first joined. And so we had pretty strong relationships in the community that had been established because of the longevity of the organization. Project Voice was actually started by students at a high school in Denver called Manual High School, which is a traditionally historically Black and Latino neighborhood, and students of color and students living in poverty. And at this time when they started the organization, there was kind of this wave of education reform happening. And the school board decided that they wanted to shut down the high school because of their testing scores. And the students at the school said, this is one of the worst things that you can do for our community. The school is a hub, a resource for us. What will happen to us once this school is closed? So they started organizing to try to keep their school open. And unfortunately, the school board did close it. And it did reopen a couple of years later. But that was really why the organization started, was through this process. The students realized, we want to be able to share this experience with other students and train them on how to actually engage with decision makers who have so much authority over what is happening in their day-to-day experience. And so that was the the start of Project Educational policy change. And over the years, they kind of opened up the issue areas to really issues students wanted to focus on. A lot of students wanted to focus on police brutality and school resource officers in their schools. We had students who were really interested in gentrification because Denver is the second most gentrifying city in the United States right now. And students were seeing that their classmates were no longer coming to class anymore because families had to move somewhere outside of the district because of the housing crisis that we're in. And so we really opened up the issue areas, kind of moved along with what the students were experiencing. And I think that allowed us to be really nimble and to be really responsive with the students and ensure that they knew we were partners with them and not an organization that was, leading with having adults be in leadership without giving students the ability to be in leadership as well. And so it was also a very, it was quite a roller coaster too, because organizations don't typically last beyond a couple of years. And so there was some shifts that happened throughout the 10 years that when I joined, Project Voice had found itself in a financial crisis. They were in a deficit. And I believe that's partially due to mission drift, and how difficult it is to find funding that's aligned with the work that you're doing, and how organizations have to bend themselves to fit the funding priorities of foundations or donors. So we first joined, we had transitioned from this, advocacy training hub for students to focusing on kind of more minuscule, I would say, issues within classrooms, such as student-teacher relationships, which of course are really important, especially when most of the, the teacher workforce are that may understand the experience of the students that they're teaching. So it's extremely important, but I think that was it was a shift in our programs that didn't really align with the original intent of the organization. And I think funders really saw that and didn't feel like we were, fulfilling the mission that we originally sought out to fulfill. And so I joined in a place where we had to redo our entire program model and rethink it, because we were focusing on these smaller issues within schools that are really kind of the symptoms of larger issues within the education system. And so through that process, there was, kind of a rebirth of an organization that had already had a pretty strong reputation in the community, which is great. And that kind of allowed us to continue building relationships with the schools and stay connected to the schools, but just really revamping the programs to be able to allow students to really drive the direction that the organization was going.
Wow, that's really important work. So you came in at a time when they had kind of lost track of their mission and their focus, and then had thus lost funding. And then you helped them to kind of get back into, this is what our mission is. We got to come back to this, even if it means that we have to let go of some of our projects. We have to stay true to our mission because that's what the funders wanted to fund. And that must have been hard. That must have been, a challenging thing to say no to some things, right, in order to get funding, and yes to some other things. And I bet that's a struggle that grassroots, nonprofits run across. And what I'm hearing you say is that it makes sense to keep revisiting how your programs meet your mission. How do your programs meet your mission? I think, maybe there's that checks and balances idea that could be applied to, leadership in the nonprofit world.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the funding part of it is always the least fun, right? It's the least fun part of the work, but it's so necessary. And, I think in the short term, it's easier to say, yes, I'll take this money because I really need it right now to be able to get to where I actually can do the work that I want to do, right? And somehow, this may not be the case for everybody, but somehow we were able to, stay committed enough to that, to where people saw that we, did know what we were doing. We were able to align the programs with what we said we were going to do. We were measurement strategies. And it just took a pause, to say, we're actually just going to take, a couple of months here and just reassess where we're at and see where we need to go and rebuild the trust with the funders to say, this is what we really want to do. And this is why it matters. And oftentimes funders also don't like, they don't like startups. They want to see that you've had results. They want to see, that you have X, Y, and Z already accomplished so that they know their money is going to something that is proven to work. And that is something that, even though we were an established organization, I definitely felt some pressure around that, to say, you need to show us that you are worthy of this money. And it was really difficult to have that dynamic with funders when that, students are saying that this is an important program, that they, feel like this is something that is worth investing in. And just trying to figure out kind of those dynamics between funders and the community, and figuring out how to align them all together.
Yeah, always, a thoughtful process, always, right? Like, what's happening? What's going on? How is this working? What feedback do I need? And what should I be considering? What can I be missing? So we have about 10, 15 minutes left, and there might be some questions from people who have been learning from you and listening to you. And so maybe if you want to raise your hand on your screen or something like that, if you have a question, and then you can ask Brea. Is that okay if we have some other questions, Brea?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So let's see. Charles, it looks like you have a question. Would you like to ask your question?
That's a really, really touching talk, and I've really learned a lot from you. So specifically on that part where you talked about funders always needing the project to be somewhere, that's something that I've specifically got a problem in, that you find very good projects, very good programs that you think would grow you, but they always want you to be somewhere and to be established and to be registered and everything. So how do you deal with that? How do you deal with that challenge so that you meet that, so that you are able to get funds while you are, because you have to start somewhere anyway, however good your project is. So how did you deal with that over time with your project?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So one thing that we did that I think could be, beneficial for other organizations to think about too, is since we had kind of lost this stability in the community because of this financial issue, or I should say credibility with the funders because of a financial issue, what we did was we partnered with other organizations who were more established and who did similar programs, but not exactly the same. But organizations that had the same values or worked with the same population that we did, and we applied for funding together. And so their organization would work on one part of the project. Our organization would work on another part of that project. And that actually turned out to work out really well, because not only did we now have a more robust program because we have a partnership with other organizations, but it also allowed us in the years coming up to say we have support from 10 foundations that are funding us at a smaller level because we're a sub grantor of this more established organization. But that foot in the door is so valuable the next year around to say we're already working on a project that you funded. It's being led by another organization, but now we think we've reached the capacity to where we can lead on a project. And so that actually helped us piece together this kind of web of different funding streams that allowed us to reach the capacity to then again apply as a, as the sole applicant on different grants, different funding opportunities and sponsorships. So that is, one strategy that I found really helpful. Partner with more established organizations to give you that step up to the next level.
Yeah, that is such a good point and a good strategy. And I like how you said that they have similar values. They might be working with the same group of people, but offering a different skill or a different learning. And then there's a true collaboration. And it does take, when you're doing those kinds of collaborations, you have to put your ego aside a little bit and adapt to some other person's way of communicating. But in that, the larger gain is that you have a connection, that you have a report, that you have a success, that you have a metric, right? And then I think that funders also will resonate with that fluidity, right? That adaptability, that capacity to do something different with another organization. Says something about the leadership as well, right? So that it says that the leadership is willing to say, well, we're not perfect at it, we can learn as well. And sometimes mission drift can happen because of the silo thinking, we're the only ones who know how to do this. Then they're not really, though, doing what they thought. I don't know. Anyways, do you have anybody else have any other questions at this time to pose? Or Abhi, do you have a question?
I'm just loving everything that Brea has been sharing and the questions as well. On Charles's question, I guess maybe a follow-up question on that is about power balancing and equity around those type of partnerships, because Brea, I completely agree with you on your suggestion of like finding those partnerships as a smaller organization when you're trying to maybe work with someone that's more organized or registered or like more established. How do you ensure that you're not giving up a lot of your agency as an organization and your values and maybe even your mission to just be able to actually be part of that sub-grantee process? I'm just curious to hear what tools that you've used and strategies that you've used in the past on that front as well.
Yeah, it's a really good question because again, the power dynamics for a smaller startup, or you have to consider that, right? And I think in my experience, we only partnered with organizations who really did have values alignment. If it wasn't aligned in the values, which part of the values was equitable, like power between organizations, that's something that we talked about right away. It wouldn't have been a good partnership for us. One other scenario that came up for us was we had a funder who had funded us in the past, but decided they would do a site visit with us. And, this foundation tended to be a little more conservative, but we felt like there was still a values alignment up until the site visit. And they came to the site visit and had, particular comments about the way that students were dressed and, just some kind of inappropriate comments for a funder to make, and thinking that they had some sort of say over what our policies were around dress codes. After that, we were like, no, this is not going to be a partnership that's going to work. That's not, something that you should have a say on, is what students are wearing in our program. That's overstepping your boundary, and that's, not acknowledging the power that you have as a funder sway what organizations are doing, I guess, telling them how to run their programs. And so it absolutely happens with funders. I think with the partnership, being a sub-grantee, it's a conversation that you have to have right from the beginning, or otherwise it probably will happen that there is a power imbalance just by the difference in the size of the organizations, even if there's no, intention to have a power imbalance. It will likely happen if you don't set the boundaries right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So amazing how, important it is to be in touch with what the values are. And I agree. If a funder, even no matter how much money they have, if they felt that they had a right to appropriate in some way or judge in some way a student that they don't even know because of how they're dressed, that's a value system that can't be aligned with any amount of money. I mean, a value dissonance, let's say, and it's got to be so hard to say no to that. But I think your choices are right. You have to uphold what the values are of the team and of the community. And boy, it's got to be kind of a hard dance sometimes. Well, we're kind of coming up to the end here, and I don't know if there's anything that you wanted to add. It's just been so wonderful to hear from you, to hear from your experience, not only working with voice, but I know that you have, now this, government experience and policy experience. And I'm really grateful for your clarity, the way that you answer the questions with examples, and your passion. And I hope that you can join our little Big Fun community again sometime. And maybe some of the people here will want to learn more from you and hear more from you in the future. I'm just really grateful, Brea, for this conversation and how you fuel our inspiration and help us to think.
Thanks, Gail. I appreciate it. I hope it's helpful, and definitely happy to chat with anybody after this if you have questions or thoughts. Yeah, definitely feel free to reach out. And I think there's a lot of interesting collaboration happen between social entrepreneurship and government. I think, really needs innovators and social entrepreneurs. And so I'm a huge proponent for getting more young people, more change makers in some of these larger systems to be able to create, better systems. So I'm just really excited to be here, and would love to hear more about the work that you're doing. And I see from the chat too that there's definitely a thread of travel, of change. So it's really exciting to see the stuff that you all are doing, and would love to continue the conversation too.
Thank you. And I bet that they will send you a little note about what it is that they're specifically doing, and all of the work that they're doing is super inspiring and important. And I know that you'll love hearing about it, and maybe there'll be others that you'll meet along the way too in our network. Thank you so much. Have a good day in Brazil. Stay safe.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. It's nice to see you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you very much, everybody,
for being here as well. And we'll see you in the next month's convening. We'll be sending out some more information. And just as a kind of wrap up, Brea talked a little bit about collaboration, partnership. If you haven't already, there's an amazing opportunity for a collaboration course that's coming up in May. It's a very small cohort. We're only having 4 groups, but basically a program that's limited to members of Little Big Fund, where you and another partner organization can apply together to learn a little bit more about writing collaborative grants and building that relationship. So if you're interested in collaborating with other organizations, do apply. We will kind of we'll send the application link one more time, maybe within the email, so you all have that as well. But thank you everyone for joining us again. We have a couple of really exciting speakers coming up in the next next 2 months. I think we've got like 2 back-to-back really amazing speakers. The next convening is going to be on May 12th, and we're having Travis Ning, who's the founder of Maya Impact, share about some of the work he's been doing in Guatemala. And for many folks, that might be an interesting organization. He's done a ton of speaking around fundraising and the work that he's led in Guatemala, and I think in Central America in general. So we'll have Travis coming in, and we've got a speaker in June as well that's going to be speaking along the lines of fundraising, but touching on all these other topics, such as topics that we heard today, which is more maybe not directly related to fundraising, but has a lot to do with growth of a nonprofit along building government relations. So with that, I know we have a minute left, but with that, I'll kind of wrap up for this month's convening. And thank you everyone for joining us. I know for folks that I think we have 45 folks in the network, and most folks can't join it all the time. So hopefully for folks that are watching a video of this recording, thanks for watching the video, and we'll see you all on May 12th, if not sooner. Thank you, everyone. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Be well.
Bye-bye.